Sandra Bullock sat quietly at the corner of the long table, her hands resting on the script pages in front of her. It was a warm evening in Los Angeles, but inside the room the air felt heavy with tension. The director was raising his voice, reminding everyone how important the next scene was and how no one could afford to make mistakes. Sandra listened, but her thoughts drifted. She was tired, not just from work, but from the weight of the weeks behind her. Too many nights had passed with little sleep, too many questions about her choices, and too many whispers that even her smile could no longer hide. Then, without warning, the door opened, and Keanu Reeves walked in. He carried no script in his hand, only a cup of coffee and a small, gentle smile. The room shifted. It was as if the energy, once sharp and restless, had softened the moment he appeared. Sandra noticed how everyone seemed calmer, but what struck her most was the way Keanu's eyes searched for her across the table. They were not the eyes of a star looking at another star. They were the eyes of someone who cared. Sandra lowered her gaze, hoping no one would notice the tears she was holding back. It wasn't the coffee that mattered, nor the silence that followed. It was the kindness. Simple, quiet, and without need for attention. Keanu walked toward her seat, placed the coffee near her hand, and whispered, "You looked like you needed this." For a moment, she could not reply. The words stuck in her throat. She wanted to say thank you, but her voice trembled. In that silence, memories flashed across her mind. Memories of lonely nights after personal loss, of reading harsh headlines, of trying to carry strength for her children while quietly feeling broken inside. The director clapped his hands and called everyone to focus. But Sandra felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. It was the reminder that someone saw her, not the actress, not the public figure, but the person who sometimes struggled just to keep moving forward. As the evening went on, the scenes became difficult. One shot demanded Sandra to break down in tears, to show despair so raw that it left the crew silent. She gave everything, pouring real pain into the act. When the director finally yelled "cut," the set was frozen. No one moved. Sandra wiped her face, but inside she felt shaken. She had opened a part of herself she rarely allowed anyone to see. She walked off the stage quickly, needing a moment to breathe, to escape the stares. Outside, in the hallway, the world felt quieter, but her heart was still racing. Then she heard footsteps behind her. "You don't have to carry it alone," Keanu said softly. Sandra turned. His words pierced deeper than she expected. She wanted to ask how he knew, how he always seemed to sense the feelings she tried to hide. But all she could do was stand there, her lips pressed tight, as tears threatened to fall again. Keanu didn't push. He didn't offer speeches or advice. Instead, he leaned against the wall beside her, staying silent, sharing the space without judgment. Minutes passed like hours, but the weight she carried seemed to lighten. It was as if his quiet presence built an invisible shield around her, one that allowed her to breathe without fear of breaking. The night ended late. Sandra went home, but sleep still didn't come easily. She sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She replayed Keanu's words, the kindness in his eyes, the way he had stepped into her silence without demanding anything in return. Deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of something she could not yet name. There would be more moments ahead. Moments filled with challenges, with questions of trust, with hidden truths waiting to be revealed. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the smallest spark of comfort. For the first time in weeks, Sandra whispered to herself, "I am not alone." And though the world outside was unaware, though no camera had captured it, that one small act of kindness planted the seed of a story that would soon grow into something much larger, something powerful enough to change both their lives forever. The next morning, Sandra woke to the sound of her phone buzzing. Sunlight crept through the curtains, but her heart still felt heavy. Messages poured in from agents, producers, and friends, all demanding something from her. Yet, in the middle of all the noise, one message stood out. It was simple. Just a short text from Keanu. "Hope you slept a little. Remember, even strong people need rest." She stared at the screen for a long time. No one else had asked her about rest. No one else seemed to notice how exhausted she was. Everyone only wanted the star, the actress, the one who could smile through the storm. But Keanu saw beyond that. As the day moved forward, she headed to the studio once again. The corridors were busy, filled with chatter and footsteps echoing on polished floors. Yet Sandra felt something different inside her, the memory of last night, his presence, his quiet words. They had settled in her heart like a small flame, refusing to die. When she stepped onto the set, whispers followed her. She could feel eyes watching, some with admiration, others with envy. In Hollywood, kindness was often mistaken for weakness. People were quick to judge, quick to gossip, but Sandra had no space for that today. She carried the warmth of his gesture, and it gave her a strange strength. The first scene demanded her to portray joy, laughter, and light, but the truth was she wasn't sure she could. Yet when her eyes accidentally caught Keanu's across the room, something shifted. He was not smiling widely, just giving her a small nod, as if reminding her she was safe. Her laughter flowed naturally then, not forced, not acted. The crew noticed. The director whispered to his assistant, "She's glowing today." But Sandra knew it wasn't her glow. It was the reflection of someone else's kindness. Later that afternoon, during a break, she sat outside on the steps of the studio. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and dust. Hollywood was noisy, yet the silence between her and Keanu felt louder than any crowd. He joined her, holding 2 paper cups. "Black coffee," he said, handing one to her. "I guessed you don't like it too sweet." She laughed softly. "You guessed right." For a few moments, they sipped in silence. Then Keanu asked, "Do you ever wonder how people forget that we're human too?" The question startled her. It was rare for someone to voice the exact thought that haunted her at night. She nodded slowly. "All the time. Sometimes I feel invisible in plain sight. Everyone sees me, but no one sees me." Keanu's eyes softened. "I see you," those words broke her guard. She looked away, trying to hide the tears building again, but it was too late. Her breath trembled. "Why are you always so kind?" she whispered. He tilted his head slightly, his voice calm. "Because I know how it feels when kindness is missing. I know what silence can do to a heart." Sandra's chest tightened. She wanted to ask him about his own pain, about the ghosts he carried behind that calm face. But something told her not to. Everyone had scars, and not all were meant to be spoken at once. Suddenly, a loud call from the director broke the moment. They were needed back on set. Sandra wiped her eyes quickly, trying to steady herself. But inside, something had already shifted. Keanu's words had planted themselves deep, and she couldn't shake them. The day dragged on with endless retakes, bright lights, and pressure from all sides. But as the hours stretched into night, another challenge arrived. During one scene, Sandra's hand began to shake uncontrollably. She tried to hide it, but the camera picked up everything. The director grew impatient, sighing loudly. "Come on, Sandra, focus. We don't have time for this." Her face burned with embarrassment. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Just then, Keanu stepped forward. "Give her a moment," he said firmly, his voice calm but filled with authority. The entire room froze. Keanu rarely spoke up against anyone, especially not directors. But in that moment, he stood tall, his presence unshakable. The director tried to argue, but Keanu's steady gaze silenced him. Sandra sat down, her heart pounding. She didn't want to look weak, didn't want to hold up the chute. But when she looked at Keanu, she saw no judgment, only patience. He crouched near her chair, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Breathe. You're not failing. You're just human." The words wrapped around her like a blanket. She inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and finally, the trembling eased. When she returned to the scene, she delivered it flawlessly. The director clapped his hands in approval, but Sandra knew the applause didn't belong to her alone. It belonged to the man who had stood by her when no one else dared. That night, as the crew packed up, Sandra felt a pull in her chest. She didn't want the day to end. She didn't want to leave the rare peace his presence gave her. As they walked toward the exit together, she whispered, "You always know when to step in." Keanu gave a small smile. "I don't always know. I just listen. Most people don't listen anymore." They parted ways at the parking lot, but Sandra couldn't shake the thought that he was right. Listening was a lost kindness. When she reached home, her children were asleep. The house was quiet, but her mind was loud. She sat in the living room, replaying every word, every glance. There was something unspoken between them, something delicate, fragile, yet powerful. Still, deep inside, she feared it. Hollywood was not a place that forgave closeness easily. Rumors spread fast. Trust was rare. She had been hurt before. And yet she could not deny that Keanu's kindness was drawing her closer, even against the walls she had built to protect herself. As she sat alone in the dark, her phone buzzed again. Another short message. Tomorrow will be tough. But you're tougher. Don't forget that. Sandra closed her eyes, pressing the phone to her chest. She whispered softly, "Why do I feel like he knows me better than I know myself?" Little did she realize. This was only the beginning of a journey that would test both their strength, reveal hidden scars, and uncover truths that neither had expected. The third day began with a storm, both outside and inside Sandra's heart. Rain fell heavy against the studio windows, and thunder rolled through the sky like distant drums. The crew complained about delays, but Sandra's worry had nothing to do with weather. She hadn't slept well. Dreams kept her awake. Dreams of voices whispering doubt. Dreams where she stood in a crowd, but no one could hear her cry for help. When she arrived at the set, her eyes carried the weight of those restless hours. The moment she walked in, she saw Keanu. He was leaning against a wall, reading quietly, his posture calm even while chaos unfolded around him. Something about that calmness anchored her, like a lighthouse in a storm. He glanced up, met her gaze, and gave a small nod. No words, no questions, just a quiet signal that she was not invisible. The morning shoot was challenging. Sandra had to play a scene of betrayal, where her character was abandoned by someone she trusted. As the cameras rolled, Sandra's chest tightened. The script blurred with real memories, memories of promises broken in her own life, of trust shattered when she needed it most. Her tears in that scene were not fake. They were raw, pulled from a deep well of past pain. When the director yelled, "Cut," the room went silent. Sandra turned away quickly, embarrassed by how much she had let slip through. She headed to her trailer, closing the door behind her, and pressed her back against it. Her breathing was heavy, uneven. A gentle knock came moments later. She didn't answer at first, but the knock repeated, soft and patient. "It's me," Keanu's voice said quietly. She hesitated, then opened the door. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried a question he didn't speak out loud. She shook her head, trying to force a smile. "I'm fine," she whispered. He didn't believe her. "You don't have to say that to me." Her lips trembled. "But if I let go, I don't know if I'll stop." Keanu stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then don't stop. Sometimes holding back is what hurts more." Sandra's defenses cracked. She sank into the chair, covering her face with her hands. The tears came fast, silent at first, then uncontrollable. She cried for the things she had lost, for the loneliness she never admitted, for the strength she forced herself to wear like a costume every day. Keanu didn't interrupt. He didn't offer false comfort. He simply sat near her, giving her space to unravel without fear of judgment. Minutes passed, but in her heart, it felt like hours of release. When she finally looked up, her face wet and swollen, he handed her a small napkin. "You don't have to be unbreakable, Sandra." "No one is." She stared at him, struck by how his words carried no pity, only respect. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" She whispered. His smile was faint, almost sad. "Because I've needed to hear those words too." The honesty in his voice left her speechless. She wanted to ask about his scars, his private battles, but she held back. She sensed that his kindness came from places he wasn't ready to share yet. The rest of the day went smoother, but Sandra's mind kept circling back to that moment. She realized something unsettling. She was starting to depend on him, not just for comfort, but for strength. That thought scared her. She had built her life on independence, on carrying burdens alone. Letting someone in felt dangerous, but danger was not far away. Later that evening, as the cast gathered for a small press briefing, Sandra noticed the way reporters' eyes shifted between her and Keanu. Their questions started harmless, about the film, about the schedule, but soon drifted into personal territory. "You and Keanu seem very close these days," one reporter said with a sly smile. Should we expect more than just on-screen chemistry? Sandra froze. Keanu remained calm, answering politely, deflecting with grace. But she could feel the heat of attention burning into her. She hated it. She hated how quickly kindness could be twisted into gossip. After the briefing, she pulled Keanu aside. "This is why I keep walls. This is why I don't let anyone too close." His eyes softened. "Let them talk. People will always talk, but they don't get to define what's real." Her voice shook. "But what if their words ruin everything?" He paused, looking at her with a steadiness that silenced her fear. "Then we keep walking anyway. Truth doesn't need an audience." Those words lingered in her heart long after she went home. Yet, as much as she wanted to believe them, doubt gnawed at her. Hollywood was a place where rumors grew faster than trust, and she had been hurt by whispers before. That night, as she sat by her window again, the city lights looked different. She wondered if kindness could survive in a world that thrived on spectacle. She wondered if she could risk letting someone in, knowing how fragile it made her feel. But then, her phone buzzed. A message appeared. "Storms pass. Light always finds a way back." Her tears returned, not from sadness, but from the strange comfort of those words. She whispered into the quiet room, "Why does it feel like he's saving me piece by piece?" Little did she know, the days ahead would bring not only deeper comfort, but also shocking turns, moments that would test their bond, reveal hidden truths from Keanu's past, and challenge Sandra in ways she had never faced before. The next day began not with the usual calm of coffee and scripts, but with tension hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Sandra walked onto the set with her usual grace, but she could feel something was different. People whispered in corners, assistants carried phones with urgency, and the director seemed distracted, pacing back and forth as if waiting for bad news. She sat quietly, pretending to read her lines, though her mind was restless. Then she overheard two crew members near the doorway. "They're going to leak it," one said. "Pictures of them together. It's already in the tabloids." Her heart froze. She didn't need to ask who "them" referred to. Her stomach tightened as she imagined headlines twisting every innocent glance, every quiet moment she had shared with Keanu. Hollywood had a cruel way of turning kindness into scandal. Minutes later, the director pulled her aside, his face lined with worry. "Sandra, you know how the press works. They'll run with this story whether it's true or not. I just hope you're ready for the noise." She forced a smile, but inside her fear was screaming. She knew the weight of public scrutiny. She had endured it before, but this time felt different. Because this time, it involved someone whose quiet presence had begun to matter more than she admitted. When Keanu arrived, she couldn't look at him at first. His calm steps, his unreadable face. He carried himself as if the storm outside couldn't touch him. But she saw it in his eyes when they finally met hers. He knew. During the lunch break, he found her sitting alone by the edge of the studio lot, staring at the rain-soaked pavement. "You heard about it?" he said gently. She nodded, her voice low. "They'll ruin everything, Keanu. They'll take your kindness and turn it into something ugly." He crouched down so his eyes met hers. "Let them. What matters isn't what they write. What matters is what's true." Her lips trembled. "But I can't carry another wave of judgment. I don't have the strength this time." He stayed quiet for a moment, then said something that made her breath catch. "Then let me carry it with you." His words were not dramatic, not loud, but they shook her deeply. No one had ever offered to share the weight before. She wanted to believe him, but fear still held her captive. The afternoon scenes went on, but Sandra's mind was elsewhere. Every time she looked at him, she remembered his words. Yet as comforting as they were, another voice inside her whispered, "What if he gets hurt because of me?" The twist came that evening. After shooting wrapped, a young woman approached Sandra outside the studio. She looked nervous, holding an old photograph in her hand. "Ms. Bullock," she said softly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think you should see this." Sandra frowned, confused. The woman handed her the photo. It was worn, edges frayed, showing a much younger Keanu sitting on a park bench with a little boy beside him. The boy was holding a broken toy and Keanu was fixing it with his bare hands. "Who are you?" Sandra asked. The woman's voice shook. That's my brother in the photo. Years ago, Keanu helped him when no one else would. He never told anyone. He bought him books, paid his school fees, even visited him in the hospital once. I just thought, you should know the kind of man he really is. Sandra's eyes blurred with tears. She had always felt his kindness, but hearing this shook her. He wasn't kind because cameras watched. He was kind when no one was looking, when no one could applaud. But the woman wasn't finished. Please, she added, don't let the world twist his goodness. People like him are rare. Sandra held the photograph tightly, her heart pounding. Suddenly, her fear of tabloids and gossip seemed small compared to the truth she now held. She realized Keanu's kindness wasn't just for her. It was who he was, deeply rooted, consistent through the years. Later that night, she confronted him gently. Why didn't you ever tell anyone about that boy? He shrugged softly. It wasn't about telling. It was about doing. If kindness needs a spotlight, it's not real. Her throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how much his words and his heart meant, but emotions clogged her chest. All she could do was whisper, Your kindness leaves me speechless, Keanu. The room fell silent between them, but in that silence lay something powerful, a connection that neither fame nor gossip could erase. Yet, as strong as that moment was, the world outside was growing louder. Headlines spread overnight, twisting their bond into rumors, dragging their names through pages filled with half-truths. Sandra braced herself for the storm, but this time, she wasn't standing alone. Still, what she didn't know was that an even greater challenge was waiting ahead, a test not of gossip or rumors, but of loyalty, sacrifice, and the courage to face truths long buried. The storm of rumors had only just begun, and Sandra felt it in every breath she took. The tabloids screamed with bold lies, secret romance exposed, Keanu and Sandra hiding more than friendship, behind-the-scenes betrayal. Each headline stabbed deeper, twisting something pure into something dirty. She tried to ignore it. But everywhere she went, the grocery store, the studio gates, even her own phone, someone had an opinion, a judgment, a cruel whisper. Yet amid the noise, Keanu stood unshaken. He walked through crowds with the same calm steps, greeted everyone with the same gentle nod, and never once denied or explained anything to the press. Sandra, shaken and restless, finally confronted him one night after filming. "Why don't you fight it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why don't you tell them the truth?" "They're destroying us." His eyes, steady as always, met hers. "Because truth doesn't need to scream. Let them say what they want. Our silence is stronger than their noise." Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that silence could shield them. But she was afraid. She had seen how words could ruin lives, how lies could stick harder than truth. A few days later, the crew was called for an out-of-town shoot. The production moved to a quiet countryside village, far from the city lights. The fresh air, the distant hills, and the soft sounds of nature felt like a strange relief. Sandra found herself breathing easier, though the weight of rumors followed her like a shadow. One evening, after a long day of filming, the two of them walked along a dirt path lined with lanterns. The night was cool, the stars faint above them. Sandra's heart ached with questions she had been holding for too long. "Keanu," she said softly, "why me? Why do you care so much?" He paused, his gaze shifting to the dark horizon. "Because I know what it's like to walk through fire alone. And I wouldn't let you do that, not if I could help." His answer carried something deeper, something unspoken. Sandra could feel it, but before she could press, a sudden sound startled them, a small cry from behind the trees. They rushed forward and found a little girl, no older than 7, sitting on the ground with a scraped knee, tears streaming down her face. Keanu knelt immediately, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket. "Hey, you're okay," he said gently. His voice, calm and warm, soothed the child instantly. He cleaned her wound carefully, speaking soft words that made the girl smile through her tears. Sandra watched in silence, her chest heavy with emotion. After the girl's parents arrived, thanking him endlessly, Sandra whispered, "You didn't even hesitate." Keanu shrugged. "Why would I? Kindness doesn't wait for cameras. Those words pierced her heart. In that moment, she realized something she had been afraid to admit. She was falling, not for the man the world admired, but for the soul who carried quiet kindness everywhere he went. But the real twist came the next morning. A crew assistant rushed into Sandra's trailer, holding her phone with panic in her eyes. "Ms. Bullock, you need to see this." Sandra took the phone, her hands shaking. The screen showed a viral video. Someone had secretly filmed the moment with the little girl, and though the act was pure, the caption twisted it cruelly. "Keanu Reeves, staging kindness for Sandra Bullock's attention." Her stomach dropped. They had taken his truth, his genuine care, and turned it into a weapon. Tears filled her eyes. "This is too much," she whispered. Later that day, she found Keanu sitting by the edge of the village fountain, calmly watching the water ripple. She held up the phone. "Did you see this?" He nodded. "I did. They're mocking you. They're saying your kindness isn't real. Doesn't it hurt?" He sighed softly. "Of course it hurts. But I can't live my life proving myself to people who don't want to believe. I know what I did. That little girl knows. That's enough." Her throat closed with emotion. "But how do you stay so strong?" His eyes grew distant, shadowed by memories. "Because once, someone was kind to me when the world wasn't. I promised myself I'd pass that on, no matter what it cost." Sandra wanted to ask who that someone was, but before she could, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, his expression shifting to something she hadn't seen before. Pain, raw and unguarded. He stood quickly. "I have to go." Her heart raced. "What happened?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Someone from my past. They need me. I can't ignore this." Before she could stop him, he walked away, leaving her with more questions than answers. That night, Sandra sat alone, holding the old photograph the young woman had given her days earlier, the one of Keanu helping the boy with the broken toy. She traced the edges with her fingers, her tears dripping onto the faded paper. She realized something that scared her. His kindness was not just saving her. It was built from wounds she didn't yet know, stories he had buried deep. And now, for the first time, she feared losing him, not to rumors or lies, but to a past that might pull him away. The night felt endless. Sandra sat by the window of her hotel room, staring at the countryside sky, her heart restless. She couldn't stop thinking about Keanu leaving so suddenly, about the look in his eyes when his phone buzzed, about the way his voice broke when he said, "Someone from my past. They need me." She had seen him calm through storms, steady under fire, but this time something cracked. It scared her. The next morning, she searched for him on set, but his chair was empty. Whispers ran through the crew. Some said he had flown back to the city. Others said he was in a nearby town. Sandra couldn't take the uncertainty. She grabbed her car keys and followed the only clue she had, a quiet address sent to her phone later that afternoon. It was a single text from Keanu. "If you need me, I'm here." She drove through winding roads until she reached a small hospice at the edge of the village. Her heart pounded as she walked through the doors. The halls smelled faintly of antiseptic and flowers. She followed the nurse's directions until she found him, sitting by the bedside of an older man. The man looked frail, his breathing shallow. Keanu was holding his hand, his eyes heavy with unspoken grief. Sandra froze in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt, but Keanu noticed her. He gave a small nod, inviting her in. "This is Michael," Keanu whispered, his voice low. He was like a brother to me." Sandra stepped closer, her chest tight. She could feel the weight of the moment, the tenderness in Keanu's face, the sorrow in his eyes. Michael's lips trembled as he spoke, barely above a whisper. "He never left me. Even when the world did. He always showed up." Tears filled Sandra's eyes. Suddenly, the pieces began to connect. The photograph of the boy with the broken toy, the countless stories left untold, the way Keanu carried kindness as if it were stitched into his very soul. He had been doing this all his life, quietly, invisibly, without asking for thanks. Michael's breathing grew weaker, and Keanu held his hand tighter. "You're not alone," he whispered. "I'm here." Sandra stood by his side, her hand brushing against his arm, silently sharing his pain. Minutes later, Michael passed peacefully, a faint smile on his lips. The room was quiet except for the sound of Keanu's slow, steady breaths. When they stepped outside, the evening air was cool, the sky painted in soft gold and pink. Sandra finally spoke, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone about him? About everything you've done for people?" Keanu looked at the horizon, his expression calm but filled with sorrow. "Because kindness isn't a story. It's a choice. If people know, they turn it into headlines. I don't want headlines. I just want people to feel less alone." Her tears spilled over, but she didn't hide them. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Keanu, you've been carrying so much for so long, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore." He turned to her, his eyes shining with quiet vulnerability. "Are you sure? Because walking beside me means facing storms. It means being misunderstood, sometimes even mocked." She stepped closer, her voice steady though her heart raced. "Then let the world mock us. Let them twist the truth. I don't care anymore, because I know who you are. And that's enough." For the first time, she saw something break through his calm mask, a tear slipping down his cheek. He tried to look away, but she caught his face gently, forcing him to see the truth in her eyes. "Your kindness saved me, Keanu, and it will keep saving others. But now, let me stand beside you. Let me share the weight." The silence between them was deep, filled with the sound of their hearts beating, the whispers of the wind, the distant songs of the countryside. And then Keanu did something he rarely did. He let go of the guard he carried for so long. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me." The days that followed were not easy. The tabloids kept spinning stories, the world kept watching, but something had changed. Sandra was no longer afraid. She no longer felt invisible because she had found someone who saw her, not the actress, not the star, but the woman who still carried scars. And Keanu was no longer walking alone through his quiet acts of kindness. Together they faced the noise, not with loud defenses or sharp words, but with quiet resilience. Their truth became stronger than the lies. Months later, at a charity event, Sandra stood on stage. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes, but her voice was steady. She told a story, not of her movies, not of Hollywood glamour, but of unseen kindness. Of how the smallest acts, given without asking for attention, could change lives. And as she spoke, her eyes found Keanu in the crowd, standing silently, his head bowed in quiet humility. The hall erupted in applause, but Sandra knew the real applause belonged to him, to the countless unseen acts he carried in silence. And when the lights dimmed, when the cameras turned away, it was just them, two souls bound not by fame or fortune, but by the quiet power of kindness. In the end, Sandra realized something she had feared for so long. It wasn't weakness to lean on someone. It wasn't failure to need kindness. It was the very thing that made life bearable, meaningful, and real. And as they walked out together into the night, hand in hand, she whispered softly, "Your kindness left me speechless, but it also gave me back my voice.